The frost line. The train reached the valley after midnight. The river looked sheeted and still until moonlight showed the slow muscle under ice. Naomi Vale rode alone in the rear carriage, counting rails by their clicks as if arithmetic could leash distance. She was moving north to catalog an archive housed in a deconsecrated chapel, a job offered by letter and accepted because the city had started to speak in the same voice as her childhood hallway. You go where the voice is quietest, she told herself, and tried to believe she was the one choosing. A man with a lantern met her at the station. "Vale?" he asked, trying the syllable like a key that might jam. "Cairn." He shook her hand as if checking temperature. He smelled of wool and stove smoke. The chapel stood on a low rise above fen, its windows full of weather instead of saints. Wind roses, isobars, a band of blue that might mean river or vein. Shelves had replaced pews. Flush and the flagstones lay steel hatches the size of doors, each with a simple dog latch and paint that flaked in loyal curls. "Frost doors," Cairn said when she looked. "When cold comes hard, the aisles try to lengthen and fold back on themselves. Dog these if the ribs sing." He rapped the nearest hatch and the sound traveled into stone like a coin falling down a well. He showed Naomi the flat over the narthex. A cot, a kettle, a desk with a scar from a bowl once set down too hot. The rules were short. Count the doors at night. Stay off the chalk circle near maritime losses when the weather drops too fast. Ignore your name if it calls from the seventh door. "Names are handles," he said. "Handles turn." Daylight made easy promises. Naomi unpacked gloves, tape, pencils, and a bone folder. Boxes arrived from municipal basements and retired stations whose attendants still kept time. Each carton had its own weather: vinegar from film, almond from old glue, a cool flower smell from paper that outlived the hands that creased it. She logged call numbers, mended spines, and returned names to shelves that had forgotten them. The chapel accepted her tread the way a hospital accepts a night nurse, without thanks, with relief. Her first night she slept without dreams. On the fourth, she woke to a noise that was not train and not wind. A pure note began in the vestry, the kind you coax by wetting a finger and circling a crystal rim. It swept the nave in pulses. Naomi sat up and counted without deciding to. 7. Pause. 7. Pause. Then a longer tremble like breath trying not to shiver. She tied laces with clumsy hands and found Cairn already downstairs, hatless, 3 lamps arranged as if to triangulate something that refused to be cornered. "Too early," he murmured. "The thaw is rehearsing." The lamps flared as if warned. Together they faced the aisle between history of weather and maritime losses. Where a solid wall should have been at the end, light bent. The space looked deeper without changing size, a magician's pocket of gray that suggested corridor. Naomi tasted metal. Cairn swore once, precisely, and hauled a hatch shut. The dog bit with a grateful clang. The gray retreated the way a thought retreats when you decide not to think it. The chime faded as if muscle remembered rest. "We marked the doors in autumn," Cairn said once the quiet had breath again. "Sometimes the stacks remember they were a nave. Sometimes they remember the fen. Cold likes to negotiate new architecture. We tell it no." His hands shook only after the work. He pointed to chalk lines near the far wall. "Don't stand there when the weather drops without warning," he said. "That is where the floor recalls another floor. The line keeps forgetting itself. Counting persuades it to stay put." Naomi nodded like a student who plans to believe later. The chapel taught her a new arithmetic. Between 2 and 3, when the overnight train crossed the river and the ribs answered politely, aisles lengthened if unlatched, as if winter were a habit the room could not break. 7 steps into any deepened aisle, temperature fell through her coat like a reprimand. If she recited call numbers in order, the gray breathed evenly. If she skipped one, the breath went eager. She lined hatch rims with chalk and learned the small relief of a latch that bites clean. The first thaw brought a body. The station master arrived with a tarpaulin and the embarrassment people wear when the world has acted as instructed but still gone wrong. "Railbed crew," he said. She put her ear down to check for water under ballast, like we teach. The ice took her hair, took more when we pulled. He did not finish. Karen did not make him. They opened the bundle in the apps as if opening a ledger. The girl's scalp was clean and not clean. Something white had braided itself into the skin, fine as cobweb glued with breath. Naomi put 2 fingers to a shoulder blade and felt a tone live in the flesh. "Don't," Karen said very fast, and she drew back, shame burning the tips of her fingers while the tone stayed there like a smuggled coal. They kept the girl until the ground softened enough to accept the weight of a name. At night, Naomi counted doors while the gray listened. Twice an aisle tried to fold back into itself in a loop that suggested hunger. Once the floor rose under the map case like dough deciding it could explain mourning better than bread. The second body came on its own. A latch hummed, a string plucked by a patient hand. Naomi looked up to find the dog easing out by itself, as if fingers on the other side were turning it with good manners. She reached the hatch as something white slid beneath it, neat as a letter. Hair, she thought, and then corrected herself. Not hair. Frost with instruction gathering into a strand. She drove the dog home and stood on the crossbar, breath loud as a train. The strand withdrew like a polite guest who had tested a handle and found it not meant for them. It was not the girl. It was the river practicing to be rope. She wanted to call Karen, but he was sleeping in the loft, hands folded in the posture the living give the dead when nothing remains to fix. She counted instead. Chalk snapped in her glove. The sharp report struck hatches throughout the nave and brought a humming like a chorus agreeing to wait until morning. Men found the third body near the signal box. They carried their hands high on their arms like misbuttoned cuffs. They would not meet Naomi's eyes. The body was wet while everything else was blade dry. "Frostwine's wrong," one said, using the voice saved for skittish animals. "The river is counting us. I laid 7 ties and wind laid 7 more beside me without wood." In the flat that night, lamps out, both of them pretending to be the kind of friends who can share a darkness without implying rescue, Karen said, "This chapel stands where the old one drowned. That one stood here because the path from river to fen is straightest, and people love straight paths. So does cold. You could move the books to town, but the roof leaks in 5 places, and one leak is named winter. You could send them south, but every city keeps its own frost doors, and some are chained from the outside. So we count." He did not sound brave. He sounded employed by a line he could not quit. On the 10th thaw night, the train missed the river. Naomi woke with laughter in her mouth and understood it as the chapel scream. Iron ribs rattled a second time too soon. Steel shrieked somewhere, a filament tone that found a matching filament in her and set it thrumming, until she bit her palm to stay in shape. Aisles lengthened by the width of 1 step. She pressed her shoulder to a hatch and felt pressure pushing back like a crowd at a door. Karen arrived bareheaded, breath minting coins of steam, and together they turned latches until their wrists ached. The floor there rose like bread remembering yeast. Naomi knelt and set both hands flat. The cold behind the stone looked up the way a dog looks up when its name lands right. "Not me," she said without sound. "Not mine." The stone listened the way a storm listens when deciding between field and town. It sank by degrees. It did not go away. Nothing in Drossel Wood went away. By dawn, 3 men were missing from the crew. Naomi found one glove under brush near the signal box, ironed flat by frost. She slid it into a catalog drawer under G and wrote "glove" left in pencil because ink froze. Spring pretended to arrive. At noon, the river carried itself with fewer complaints, and the chapel unbent like an old woman choosing a chair with a view. Naomi left 2 doors unlatched. The aisles behaved. The gray at the end of maritime losses yawned and then closed like a throat cleared. The voice started after that. It did not belong to river or chapel. It belonged to the corridor outside her childhood room and to the blank band of radio nobody tuned. It said her name 3 times as if taking attendance. Naomi, 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 and then patient as a bill collector, door 7. She stood beside the 7th hatch and felt nothing except the scratch of wool at her wrist. "No," she said, "no door for you." The voice laughed like tape played backward. It said, "7 is where heat leaves. 7 is where you forgot to count and the hall got longer." She told Karen, and he spoke the honest rule. Do not let it use your name. Naomi said names keep, and he said names keep only when tied to something heavier than air. So she tied hers to work. She mended a ledger dried open like forgiving hands. She indexed pamphlets that called a flood a miracle because it drowned the right men. She taped photographs until a bridge recognized itself without relief. She penciled NV in corners, light and real. The voice sulked. Then it learned and called other names. It called cairns in the music of a mother at a window. It called the station masters like a bar tab recited by a friendly enemy. It called the 3 missing men and made each sound like a boy wearing his father's coat. The chapel heard and clenched, and aisles lengthened half an inch without moving. Numbers answered where names failed. Naomi counted latches, steps, breaths in the gray,